History is a tapestry woven with the threads of names, but few resonate with the weight of Elizabeth. Separated by nearly 4 centuries, 2 women emerged from the shadows of doubt to define the British spirit. One was a Tudor phoenix, rising from the ashes of a fractured court. The other, a Windsor pillar, standing firm as the sun set on an empire. This is a story of power, sacrifice, and the evolution of a crown. We begin in the gloom of ancient chambers where the first Elizabeth's journey began, juxtaposed against the stoic modernity of the second's early reign, exploring how 2 queens, disparate in time, became the singular face of an era. In 1533, the birth of Elizabeth Tudor was met with silence rather than celebration. To her father, Henry VIII, she was a disappointment, a female heir in a world that demanded sons. She spent her youth navigating the treacherous halls of Hampton Court, where a single misstep meant the executioner's axe. Her survival was not guaranteed. She was a political pawn in a religious war. This environment forged a woman of iron will and sharp intellect, one who learned to speak in riddles and keep her true intentions hidden behind a mask of regal composure. Her childhood was a masterclass in survival, set against the backdrop of a volatile, changing England. 400 years later, Elizabeth Alexandra Mary was born into a world that had moved past the divine right of kings, but still clung to the stability of the crown. Unlike her predecessor, she was the beloved daughter of a duke, yet she too was never intended to be queen. Her path to the throne was cleared by the scandal of abdication, thrusting her father into a role that would eventually claim his health. Growing up during the Blitz, she saw a world on fire, learning that the monarchy was not just about power, but about service and being a steady pulse for a nation in its darkest hour. The Windsor girl and the Tudor princess both shared the burden of an unexpected destiny. The moment of ascension for both women was marked by a profound sense of isolation. For Elizabeth I, it happened under an oak tree at Hatfield. For Elizabeth II, in a remote lodge in Kenya. Both were young, both were surrounded by men who doubted their capacity to lead, and both stepped onto the throne at a time when England faced an uncertain future. Elizabeth I inherited a bankrupt nation torn by religious strife, while Elizabeth II inherited a crumbling empire and a world recovering from total war. The crown was not a gift, but a heavy mantle that required the total submergence of their private selves into their public roles. Elizabeth I's court was a theatre of shadows, surrounded by spies and ambitious courtiers like William Cecil. She had to master the art of the Virgin Queen. By refusing to marry, she turned her perceived weakness, her gender, into a source of mystical power, claiming she was married to England itself. Her reign was a constant battle against Catholic conspiracies and the looming threat of the Spanish Armada. Every portrait was carefully curated to project an image of ageless divine authority. In the dark corners of her palaces, she was a tactician, using her intellect to outmaneuver the most powerful men in Europe, ensuring her survival through sheer force of personality. Elizabeth II faced a different kind of theatre, the glare of the television camera. Her coronation was the first to be broadcast to millions, a technological leap that changed the relationship between the monarch and the people forever. While Elizabeth I used her physical presence to command, Elizabeth II used her silence and her image to provide a sense of continuity. She navigated the transition from empire to Commonwealth with a quiet diplomacy, becoming the most travelled monarch in history. Her challenge was to remain relevant in a democratic age that increasingly questioned the necessity of a throne, yet she maintained a stoic dignity that bridged the gap between the medieval past and the modern future. The visual language of the two queens defines their respective eras. Elizabeth I is remembered for her white lead makeup, her towering red wigs, and her gowns encrusted with pearls and symbolic embroidery, eyes and ears to show she saw and heard all. Elizabeth II is defined by her handbags, her brightly coloured coats designed to be seen in a crowd, and the constant presence of her pearls. Both used fashion as a uniform of power. For the first, it was a shield to hide her ageing and vulnerability. For the second, it was a signal of consistency. These symbols became iconic, transforming two human women into enduring monuments of British identity. Communication was the weapon of choice for both sovereigns. Elizabeth I was a master of the spoken word, delivering stirring speeches like the one at Tilbury to inspire her troops against the Spanish. Her words were transcribed and whispered through the streets, creating a legendary persona. Elizabeth II, however, mastered the art of the Christmas broadcast and the televised address. Her voice became a familiar presence in the living rooms of her subjects, offering comfort during the Cold War, economic strikes, and national tragedies. One spoke to the heart of the soldier, the other spoke to the soul of the citizen, but both used their voices to anchor a nation in flux. The burden of the crown often meant the sacrifice of personal happiness. Elizabeth I famously remained the Virgin Queen, choosing the security of her realm over the risks of a foreign or domestic marriage that could destabilize her power. Elizabeth II, while married for over 7 decades, had to place the firm above her family, often navigating the scandals of her children and the tragic death of Princess Diana under the harsh light of public scrutiny. Both queens lived lives of profound duty, where their private emotions were secondary to the survival of the institution they represented. The loneliness of the throne is a constant across the centuries, a quiet struggle hidden behind the public mask. As we look back at these two extraordinary reigns, we see the evolution of the British state mirrored in their lives. Elizabeth I took a small threatened island and turned it into a rising global power, sparking a golden age of literature and exploration. Elizabeth II took a global power and managed its transition into a modern symbolic role, providing a sense of permanence in a world of rapid technological and social change. Together, they represent the bookends of a Great Britain that transformed from a medieval kingdom to a modern constitutional monarchy. Their legacy is not just in the laws they signed, but in the enduring mythos of the Elizabethan name, a symbol of resilience through the ages. In the autumn of 1533, the birth of a girl at Greenwich Palace was met not with cheers, but with a suffocating silence. King Henry VIII had upended the world, breaking from Rome and casting aside a queen, all for the promise of a male heir. Instead, he was presented with Elizabeth. This infant was a disappointment to a dynasty, a political liability from her first breath. Yet, within this rejection lay the seeds of a fierce independence. Born into a court of shadows and shifting loyalties, her very existence was an affront to the established order, marking the start of a perilous journey toward the throne. The young Elizabeth's life was a masterclass in survival. Following her mother's execution and her father's death, she navigated the treacherous waters of her siblings' reigns. Under her sister Mary, she was branded a heretic and a rebel, eventually finding herself a prisoner within the cold, damp walls of the Tower of London. Every footstep in the corridor could have been her executioner. This era of isolation and constant threat forged a mind of steel. She learned the art of silence and the power of ambiguity, survival traits that would later define her long and calculated reign over a fractured nation. Upon her coronation in 1558, Elizabeth I inherited a kingdom on the brink of collapse. England was bankrupt, religiously divided, and caught in the crosshairs of the great Catholic powers of Europe. The crown she wore was heavy with the weight of a crumbling state. To the world she was a weak and feeble woman, but to her people she became the Virgin Queen, a figurehead who would sacrifice her personal life to become the living embodiment of the state. Her coronation was not just a ceremony, it was a declaration of war against the expectation of her failure. The year 1588 defined the Elizabethan era as the Spanish Armada sailed for the English coast. It was a moment of existential dread. Elizabeth, clad in a silver breastplate over her white velvet gown, stood before her troops at Tilbury. Her words ignited a fire in the hearts of her soldiers, transforming a defensive struggle into a legendary victory. The defeat of the Armada wasn't just a military triumph, it was a psychological turning point that heralded England's rise as a maritime superpower. Under her guidance, the small island nation began to project its influence across the vast unknown oceans. As the sun set on the first Elizabethan age, the Queen had become a living icon, her face painted in white lead, and her gowns encrusted with symbolic jewels. This was Gloriana, a calculated image of eternal power designed to hide the frailties of age and the anxieties of a childless succession. Her court was a stage where poets like Shakespeare and explorers like Drake performed. Despite the internal unrest and the burden of rule, she had overseen a golden age. Her death in 1603 marked the end of a dynasty, leaving behind a mythos that would endure for centuries. 4 centuries later, in 1926, another Elizabeth was born into a world vastly different, yet equally burdened by tradition. Elizabeth II was never meant to be queen. She was the daughter of the king's younger brother. Her early years were spent in the quiet comfort of a royal household that expected a life of relative obscurity. However, the abdication crisis of 1936 shattered those expectations. Overnight, her father became king, and she became the heir presumptive. Her destiny was rewritten by scandal and duty, thrusting a shy young woman toward a throne that would witness the transition from empire to modern state. The Second World War provided the young Elizabeth II with her first true test of service. Rejecting the safety of the countryside, she joined the Auxiliary Territorial Service, learning to drive and repair heavy military vehicles. She was not just a figurehead, she was a princess in overalls, covered in oil and grit, serving alongside her people during their darkest hour. This experience grounded her in the reality of her subjects' lives and solidified the bond between the crown and the public. It was a preparation for a reign that would be defined by service, duty, and the quiet resilience of a nation under fire. In 1953, the coronation of Elizabeth II was a spectacle that bridged the gap between ancient tradition and modern technology. For the first time, cameras were allowed inside Westminster Abbey, broadcasting the sacred ritual to millions of homes around the world. As the heavy St. Edward's crown was placed upon her head, it symbolised more than just the start of a new reign. It was the birth of a new Elizabethan era. While the first Elizabeth had to fight for her legitimacy, the second had to navigate the visibility of a television age, where every gesture was scrutinised by a global audience. As the decades passed, Elizabeth II presided over the sunset of the British Empire. She watched as former colonies sought independence, and she worked tirelessly to transform the empire into a Commonwealth of nations. Unlike Elizabeth I, who sought to expand English power through force and exploration, Elizabeth II managed the graceful retreat of that power, maintaining influence through diplomacy and personal connection. She became a globe-trotting symbol of continuity, visiting more countries than any monarch in history. Her role was no longer to rule, but to represent, providing a steady hand through the social and political upheavals of the 20th century. The two Elizabeths represent two different philosophies of power. Elizabeth I was a ruler of absolute will, a woman who had to command and conquer to survive in a man's world. Elizabeth II was a monarch of constitutional restraint, a woman who had to remain silent and neutral to ensure the survival of the crown in a democratic age. One built the foundation of a global power, the other managed its transformation into a modern symbol. Together, their reigns, spanning 5 centuries, tell the story of Britain itself, from a medieval kingdom of shadows to a modern nation navigating the complexities of a globalized world. The early life of Elizabeth I was defined by the precariousness of the Tudor line. Following the death of her father, Henry VIII, and her brother, Edward VI, she found herself imprisoned in the Tower of London by her half-sister, Mary I. In these cold, damp stone walls, Elizabeth learned the value of silence and the necessity of caution. Every word she spoke was scrutinized for treason. The threat of the executioner's block was a constant presence, forging a ruler who understood that survival was the first duty of a monarch, and that power was a weapon to be wielded with surgical precision. For Elizabeth II, the path to the throne was not blocked by iron bars, but by a constitutional crisis that shook the foundations of the 20th century monarchy. The abdication of her uncle, Edward VIII, in 1936 was a moment of profound uncertainty. Suddenly, the quiet life of a minor royal was stripped away. As her father, George VI, reluctantly took the crown, the young Elizabeth became the heir presumptive. She watched her father struggle with the burden of leadership during wartime, learning that the crown was not a prize to be won, but a duty to be endured for the sake of national stability. Elizabeth I's education was a rigorous immersion in the humanist traditions of the Renaissance. Under the tutelage of Roger Ascham, she mastered Latin, Greek, French, and Italian, alongside history and philosophy. This was more than mere academic pursuit. It was the training of a statesman. She studied the failures and successes of ancient emperors, preparing for a world where her intellect would be her greatest defense. In an era where women were often dismissed as intellectually inferior, Elizabeth was arming herself with the knowledge to outmaneuver the most seasoned diplomats and scholars in Europe. Princess Elizabeth's preparation for the throne was marked by the steady hand of the British establishment. She was privately tutored in constitutional history by Henry Martin, the Vice Provost of Eton College. Her education was less about the classical arts and more about the intricate mechanics of a modern constitutional monarchy. She learned the limits of her future power, the importance of political neutrality, and the sacred nature of the relationship between the sovereign and the parliament. Her classroom was the quiet library of Windsor Castle, where the weight of centuries of legal precedent replaced the volatile politics of the Tudor court. In November 1558, the message finally came to Hatfield House. Elizabeth I was sitting under an oak tree when she was informed that her sister, Mary I, had died, and she was now queen. Tradition says she fell to her knees and quoted the Psalms. "This is the Lord's doing, and it is marvellous in our eyes." Her accession marked the end of years of fear and the beginning of an era that would redefine England. She inherited a bankrupt treasury and a nation divided by religious fervour. Yet, her ascension signalled a new, resilient spirit for a kingdom on the brink of change. On February 6, 1952, the world changed for Elizabeth II while she was thousands of miles from home. Staying at Treetops Hotel in Kenya, she climbed a ladder into a tree house as a princess and descended as a queen. Her father, George VI, had passed away in his sleep at Sandringham. The news reached her through her husband, Prince Philip, in a moment of quiet, private grief. Unlike the grand proclamations of the past, her accession was a sombre, global event transmitted via telegram, marking the start of a reign that would bridge the gap between the British Empire and the modern Commonwealth. The coronation of Elizabeth I in January 1559 was a spectacular display of Tudor propaganda. Clad in cloth of gold and crimson velvet, she processed through the streets of London, carefully engaging with the common people to secure their loyalty. The ceremony itself was a delicate compromise, blending traditional Catholic rites with the emerging Protestant identity of her court. It was a visual manifesto of her middle way, a signal that she intended to lead a united nation rather than a faction. In the shadows of Westminster Abbey, she was transformed from a survivor into a divinely ordained ruler of a rising power. Scene 28. Nearly 400 years later, Elizabeth II's coronation in 1953 became the first major global event of the television age. Against the advice of the Prime Minister and the Church, she insisted on cameras being allowed inside the Abbey. Millions watched as the ancient rituals were broadcast into their living rooms, demystifying the monarchy while simultaneously cementing its place in the hearts of the public. This coronation was not just a religious ceremony, it was a technological milestone. It proved that while the Queen's role was ancient, her method of reaching her subjects would be defined by the most modern tools of her time. To maintain her absolute will, Elizabeth I relied on a sophisticated network of spies and advisors. Sir Francis Walsingham, her legendary spymaster, operated in the shadows, intercepting coded letters and uncovering assassination plots from both home and abroad. This secret service was the invisible armour of the Virgin Queen. In a world of daggers and poison, knowledge was the only currency that mattered. Elizabeth's court was a place of high fashion and higher stakes, where a single slip of the tongue could lead to the block, and where the Queen's safety depended on the dark arts of espionage. Elizabeth II began her reign under the mentorship of a lion of British history, Winston Churchill. As her first Prime Minister, he provided a vital link to the Victorian age of her grandfather. Their weekly audiences became a masterclass in the art of governance, where the young Queen learned to exercise her right to be consulted, to encourage, and to warn. While she held no legislative power, her influence grew through her mastery of information and her longevity. She became the constant thread in a changing political tapestry, providing a sense of permanence as Britain transitioned from a global empire to a modern democratic state. Centuries earlier, Elizabeth I faced a very different political landscape, where her modern successor reigned through soft power. The first Elizabeth ruled with a steel fist in a velvet glove, surrounded by a circle of ambitious men, most notably her trusted advisor, William Cecil. She navigated a treacherous court where whispers of treason were as common as prayers. She was the final arbiter of law, her signature carrying the weight of life and death. Her Privy Council was a den of brilliance and rivalry, and the Queen played her advisors against one another to ensure that the ultimate power remained solely in her hands. Elizabeth I understood the power of the spoken word. In an era without mass media, her voice was her primary weapon of statecraft. She carefully crafted her public image, delivering soaring orations that united a fractured nation. Whether addressing Parliament or her troops, she spoke with a divine authority that demanded absolute loyalty. Her golden speech near the end of her reign was a testament to this mastery, a declaration that while God had made her high, she counted the glory of her crown to be that she reigned with her subjects' loves. It was a calculated, brilliant performance of regal devotion. Contrast this with Elizabeth II, who ascended the throne at the dawn of the television age. While Elizabeth I's voice reached only those within earshot, Elizabeth II became the first monarch whose image and voice were transmitted into the private living rooms of millions. She had to master a new kind of intimacy, the ability to speak to a vast, invisible audience as if she were addressing each citizen personally. This transition from the distant semi-divine figure of the Tudor age to a visible, domestic presence was a revolutionary shift in the relationship between the British Crown and its people. In 1957, Elizabeth II took a bold step by televising her annual Christmas broadcast for the first time. She acknowledged the changing times, noting that it was inevitable that she should seem a rather remote figure to many. By inviting the cameras into Sandringham, she broke the traditional barrier of royal mystique. This wasn't the fiery rhetoric of Tilbury, but a quiet, steady presence intended to provide comfort and continuity in a rapidly modernising world. Through the flickering black and white screens, she became a familiar part of the British family fabric, bridging the gap between the ancient institution and the modern household. As the Cold War deepened and the British Empire dissolved, Elizabeth II found her role redefined as the head of the Commonwealth. This was a unique, voluntary association of independent nations, and the Queen was its vital heartbeat. Unlike Elizabeth I, whose international influence was often tied to naval conquest, Elizabeth II's global impact was rooted in diplomacy and symbolic unity. She travelled more than any monarch in history, acting as a soft power ambassador. In a world divided by the Iron Curtain, her presence served as a stabilising force, maintaining old ties while forging new partnerships across diverse cultures. Elizabeth I's international challenges were far more existential. She inherited a nation torn apart by the fires of the Reformation. Her reign was a constant balancing act between Catholic and Protestant factions, both at home and abroad. Every diplomatic move was a chess game against the great powers of Europe, Spain, France, and the papacy. She used her status as an unmarried queen as a diplomatic bargaining chip, dangling the prospect of marriage to secure alliances, only to withdraw when the advantage shifted. It was a dangerous, high-stakes game of survival, where a single misstep could lead to invasion or assassination. Following her coronation, Elizabeth II embarked on an ambitious 6-month tour of the Commonwealth, covering over 40,000 miles. From the humid heat of Bermuda to the vast landscapes of Australia, she was greeted by millions. This marathon journey solidified her status as a global icon and demonstrated the monarchy's commitment to its new role. While she lacked the executive power her Tudor namesake wielded, her physical presence across the globe exerted a different kind of influence, a unifying thread that held together a fragmenting empire. It was a modern crusade of diplomacy, conducted not with ships of war, but with handshakes. The public identities of the two queens were built on opposing foundations. Elizabeth I famously remained the Virgin Queen, wedded only to her nation. This sacrifice of personal family life was a political necessity to maintain her independence and avoid the foreign entanglements of a royal husband. In contrast, Elizabeth II's role as a wife and mother was central to her public image. She represented the idealised British family, providing a model of stability and duty. While the first Elizabeth used her solitude as a shield, the second used her family as an anchor, grounding the monarchy in the shared experiences of her subjects. Despite the centuries separating them, both women understood the profound solitude of the crown. To be a queen regnant is to occupy a space that no one else truly understands. For Elizabeth I, it was the constant threat of the executioner's axe and the heavy weight of being the final Tudor. For Elizabeth II, it was the relentless scrutiny of the modern press and the exhaustion of a lifetime of public service. Both women suppressed their private selves to serve the institution. The crown was not just a symbol of power, but a burden that required a suppression of individual desire in favour of the eternal state. The evolution of technology transformed the way these two monarchs were perceived. Elizabeth I's image was frozen in oil paintings, carefully controlled icons that aged little over decades, preserving her as an eternal, ageless figure. Elizabeth II, however, aged in the public eye through the lens of high-definition cameras and eventually the digital age. Her every wrinkle and change in gait was documented. One used art to create a myth, the other used media to maintain a reality. As we move deeper into the 20th century, the monarchy would have to adapt to a world where secrets were harder to keep and mystique was challenged. In the mid-20th century, the mystery of the monarchy faced its greatest challenge: the television camera. Elizabeth II's 1953 coronation was a watershed moment, bringing the sacred rites of Westminster Abbey into the living rooms of millions. Contrast this with Elizabeth I, whose public appearances were carefully staged theatrical events, designed to be viewed from a distance. While the first Elizabeth used distance to cultivate an aura of divinity, the second Elizabeth allowed the camera to bridge that gap, albeit under strict protocol. This shift signalled the end of royal seclusion and the beginning of a new, transparent era of sovereignty. Security was a constant preoccupation for both women, though the threats they faced evolved. Elizabeth I lived in a world of daggers, poisoned letters, and clandestine Catholic plots, relying on Sir Francis Walsingham's intricate web of spies to survive. Elizabeth II's era introduced the invisible dangers of the Cold War and the persistent threat of modern terrorism. Both queens moved through their worlds, knowing that the crown made them targets. The shadow of the assassin was a constant companion, forcing them to balance their public duty with the necessity of constant high-stakes protection in an increasingly volatile political landscape. The concept of the British Empire underwent a radical transformation between these two reigns. Elizabeth I sat at the dawn of English expansion, her privateers like Drake and Raleigh claiming distant shores in a quest for gold and glory. Elizabeth II, conversely, presided over the peaceful dissolution of that empire, guiding the transition into the Commonwealth of Nations, where one Elizabeth saw the birth of colonial ambition, the other managed its dignified retreat. This evolution reflected a changing world order, moving from the dominance of the sword to the influence of diplomatic soft power and mutual cooperation among sovereign states. The weight of the crown is not merely symbolic, it is a physical and psychological burden that shapes the wearer. Elizabeth I famously claimed to be married to her kingdom, sacrificing personal happiness and the prospect of heirs to maintain her singular grip on power. Elizabeth II, while a wife and mother, often had to place the interests of the firm above her family's private desires. Both women navigated the lonely heights of leadership, where the demands of the state often clashed with the yearnings of the heart. This shared isolation created a unique sisterhood across the centuries, defined by duty above all else. Fashion was a potent political tool for both Elizabeths. The first Elizabeth used her pelican portrait and armada portrait to display wealth and invincibility, her garments encrusted with pearls and symbolic embroidery. Elizabeth II utilised a different kind of sartorial strategy, adopting a vibrant, colour-blocked wardrobe that ensured she was visible to even the furthest spectator in a crowd. While the Tudor Queen used her dress to project a semi-divine status, the modern Queen used hers to ensure she remained a tangible, recognisable presence in the lives of her subjects. In both cases, the royal wardrobe was a carefully crafted uniform of authority. Religious tensions defined the early years of Elizabeth I as she navigated the dangerous waters of the English Reformation, seeking a middle way between Catholicism and radical Protestantism. Her very legitimacy was tied to the spiritual independence of the English Church. Elizabeth II inherited a more secular society, but her role as defender of the faith remained central to her identity. She provided a steady moral compass during decades of rapid social change and declining church attendance. For both monarchs, their relationship with the divine was a cornerstone of their authority, providing a sense of continuity in a world of shifting beliefs and values. The machinery of government evolved from the personal whims of a monarch to a constitutional framework. Elizabeth I governed through a small, hand-picked Privy Council where her personal favour could make or break a career. She was the final arbiter of law and policy. Elizabeth II, however, mastered the art of encouraging, warning, and being consulted, working alongside 14 different prime ministers. Though her direct power was limited by convention, her influence was profound. Both queens demonstrated an extraordinary ability to manage powerful men, using their intellect and longevity to command respect in the corridors of power, whether in a palace chamber or 10 Downing Street. Crisis management was a defining characteristic of both reigns. Elizabeth I faced the existential threat of the Spanish Armada, delivering her famous speech at Tilbury to steal the hearts of her soldiers. Elizabeth II became a symbol of national resilience during the Blitz and later guided the country through economic strikes and social unrest. Both queens understood the power of the spoken word and the importance of being seen during times of peril. They were the anchors of the state, providing a sense of permanence and calm when the winds of history blew most fiercely against the British Isles. The concept of the royal family as a public institution was a modern invention that Elizabeth II had to navigate. Elizabeth I's court was a hive of noble factions and favourites, but it lacked the domestic scrutiny faced by the House of Windsor. The 20th century brought the private lives of the royals into the tabloid spotlight, turning personal tragedies into public scandals. Elizabeth II had to maintain the dignity of the crown, while her children's lives were picked apart by the press. This was a battle Elizabeth I never had to fight, as her lack of an immediate family served as her greatest shield and her greatest political liability. As we look at the midpoint of these two extraordinary lives, we see the threads of continuity that bind them. Both Elizabeths were unexpected heirs, thrust into power during times of uncertainty. Both had to define what it meant to be a female ruler in a world dominated by men. Their legacies are built on the twin pillars of duty and adaptation. Elizabeth I laid the foundations of a global power, while Elizabeth II ensured that the institution of the monarchy survived into a radically different millennium. As the 20th century progressed, the challenge would be to remain relevant in an age that increasingly questioned the necessity of kings and queens. By the mid-20th century, the world Elizabeth II inherited was transforming at a pace unseen in history. The 1960s brought a cultural revolution that challenged every traditional pillar, including the monarchy. While Elizabeth I had to contend with the shifting religious landscapes of the Reformation, Elizabeth II faced a secular upheaval. Both queens found themselves as the steady anchors in a sea of radical change. For the first Elizabeth, it was about maintaining the divine right. For the second, it was about justifying the crown's existence in a democratic age that began to view ancient rituals with skepticism. Communication was the primary tool for both monarchs to maintain their grip on the public imagination. Elizabeth I utilised progresses, grand tours of the English countryside, where she displayed her majesty to the common folk in person, turning her presence into a legendary event. In 1953, Elizabeth II took a revolutionary step by allowing the cameras into Westminster Abbey for her coronation. This broadcast brought the sacred mystery of the monarchy into the living rooms of millions. Both women understood that to be a queen, one must be seen, yet both carefully curated which parts of themselves remained hidden. The mask of youth was a political necessity for Elizabeth I as she aged, using heavy white lead makeup and elaborate wigs to maintain an image of eternal vitality. She could not afford to look weak in a court of ambitious men. Elizabeth II used the consistency of her image, her silhouette, her handbags, and her stoic expression to provide a sense of permanent stability through decades of political turnover. Though their methods differed, the objective was identical: to project an aura of timelessness that transcended the physical aging of the woman wearing the crown, ensuring the office appeared immortal. Security was a constant shadow over both reigns. For Elizabeth I, the threat came from clandestine Catholic plots and the looming Spanish fleet, requiring a vast network of spies led by Francis Walsingham. For Elizabeth II, the threats were modernised, but no less lethal, ranging from the height of the Cold War to the internal strife of the Troubles. Both queens lived under the perpetual gaze of those who would see the crown fall. This shared experience of being a target forged a temperament of extreme caution and an iron-willed composure that became the hallmark of their public personas. The concept of the mother of the nation took different forms for each. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, famously claimed to be married to her kingdom, using her lack of children to maintain her autonomy and keep foreign powers at bay through marriage negotiations. Elizabeth II, conversely, was a literal mother and grandmother, her family life often serving as a mirror for the nation's own domestic struggles. While the first Elizabeth used her solitude as a weapon of statecraft, the second used her family as a bridge to the public, though both found that their personal lives were never truly their own. The shift in global power defined their eras. Elizabeth I presided over the birth of English maritime expansion, setting the stage for an empire that would span the globe. Elizabeth II, however, presided over its dissolution. She navigated the transition from the British Empire to the Commonwealth with a grace that preserved British influence without the need for conquest. Where one queen saw the dawn of global dominance, the other saw its sunset, yet both worked tirelessly to ensure that the British monarch remained a central, respected figure on the world stage, regardless of the nation's territorial reach. In the face of dissent, both queens were forced to make impossible choices. Elizabeth I had to sign the death warrant of her cousin Mary, Queen of Scots, a decision that haunted her, but was deemed necessary for the security of her throne. Elizabeth II faced the constitutional crises of the late 20th century, including the decolonisation of nations that once formed the backbone of the empire. Though the stakes of the 1500s were often measured in blood, and those of the 1900s in diplomacy, the weight of responsibility for the survival of the crown remained a heavy, solitary burden for both women. The Annus Horribilis of 1992 for Elizabeth II, marked by family scandals and a devastating fire at Windsor Castle, mirrored the final, difficult decade of Elizabeth I's reign. The 1590s were plagued by famine, economic depression, and the rebellion of her former favourite, the Earl of Essex. Both queens found that their long reigns ended not with simple triumph, but with a complex struggle to maintain order and dignity amidst personal and national turmoil. These periods tested their resilience and forced them to confront the reality that even the most powerful monarchs are subject to the whims of time and fortune. As they entered the twilights of their reigns, both Elizabeths became symbols of continuity for their people. Elizabeth I was the Gloriana who had seen England through its most perilous years, becoming a living legend. Elizabeth II became a grandmother to the world, a constant presence in a world that had changed beyond recognition since her youth. They both outlived many of their contemporaries, becoming survivors who carried the memory of a lost world into a new one. Their longevity was not just a feat of health, but a strategic asset that provided the crown with an air of absolute permanence. The transition of power is the final duty of any monarch, and both Elizabeths approached this with the same sense of duty that defined their lives. Elizabeth I, on her deathbed, finally named James of Scotland as her successor, ending the uncertainty of the Tudor line. Elizabeth II spent her final years meticulously preparing the way for her son, Charles, ensuring the transition would be seamless and the institution would remain intact. As we move toward the conclusion of their stories, we see that their greatest achievement was not just in how they ruled, but in how they ensured the crown would endure long after they were gone. In the winter of 1603, the atmosphere at Richmond Palace was heavy with the scent of burning herbs and the weight of an era ending. Elizabeth I, the Virgin Queen, refused to take to her bed, fearing the finality it represented. She sat for days upon cushions on the floor, her eyes fixed on the shadows, her once vibrant spirit trapped in a failing body. The court watched in hushed silence as the Tudor flame flickered low. Her refusal to yield to death was her final act of defiance, a silent struggle against the inevitable transition that would soon hand her kingdom to a distant cousin from the north. Centuries later, at Balmoral Castle, Elizabeth II faced her own twilight with a different form of resolve. Though her physical strength had waned, her sense of duty remained absolute until the very last. Just days before her passing, she stood to greet a new Prime Minister, her hands bruised but her smile steady. The misty Highlands provided a sombre backdrop to this final act of constitutional service. Unlike her predecessor's fearful vigil, Elizabeth II's end was a quiet withdrawal, a dignified conclusion to a record-breaking reign that had spanned 7 decades of unprecedented global change and social evolution. With the passing of Elizabeth I, the Tudor line reached its silent conclusion. The crown was carried across the border to James VI of Scotland, marking the union of the crowns. The transition was a moment of profound uncertainty for the English people, who had known no other monarch for nearly half a century. The streets of London were quiet, filled with a mixture of grief and anxiety for what this new foreign dynasty might bring. The Virgin Queen's legacy was a solidified national identity, but her death left a vacuum that only a king from a rival house could fill. When Elizabeth II passed, the transition was a masterclass in modern continuity. The machinery of state, which she had helped refine over 70 years, swung into immediate action. Her son, Charles, stepped into the role he had spent a lifetime preparing for, ensuring the institution's survival in a rapidly changing world. While the world mourned the person, the crown itself remained steadfast, proving that the modernization Elizabeth II championed had succeeded in making the monarchy resilient. The transition was not a moment of crisis, but a testament to the stability she had spent her entire life cultivating and protecting. The funeral of Elizabeth I in 1603 was a sombre, torch-lit procession through the narrow, muddy streets of London. Thousands of citizens braved the damp air to catch a glimpse of the lead-lined coffin of the woman who had defined their world. The air was thick with the smell of wood smoke and the sound of tolling bells. It was a farewell to a queen who had become a living symbol of England itself. To her subjects, her death felt like the end of a golden age, a terrifying leap into an unknown future where the old certainties of the Tudor era no longer held sway. Elizabeth II's final journey was witnessed by billions, a global event of unprecedented scale. From the quiet hills of Scotland to the grand avenues of London, millions stood in the queue, a silent, mile-long testament to her impact on the individual lives of her subjects. The atmosphere was one of collective reflection and shared history. People from all walks of life waited through the night, a modern pilgrimage that mirrored the ancient devotion shown to her namesake. It was a powerful demonstration that even in a secular, digital age, the symbolic power of the monarchy remained a unifying force for a diverse nation. Both queens found their final rest within the hallowed walls of Westminster Abbey, a place that embodies 1,000 years of British history. Elizabeth I lies in the north aisle of Henry VII's Lady Chapel, her tomb a masterpiece of Jacobean sculpture. Elizabeth II's final resting place in the King George VI Memorial Chapel connects her forever to her parents and her husband. In death, they are unified by the stone and glass of the Abbey, two women who held the same sceptre centuries apart, now part of the silent, eternal congregation of monarchs who shaped the destiny of an island nation. The impact of the two Elizabeths on national identity cannot be overstated. Elizabeth I forged a sense of Englishness through conflict and cultural flowering, defining the nation against the giants of Europe. Elizabeth II, conversely, navigated the transition from an empire to a Commonwealth, helping the nation find a new identity in a post-imperial world. While one built the foundations of global power, the other managed its transformation with grace. Both queens became the mirrors in which their subjects saw themselves, providing a consistent point of reference during times of radical change, ensuring the crown remained the heart of the national story. To wear the crown is to accept a life of profound isolation and heavy responsibility. Both Elizabeths understood that the person must be secondary to the office. This sacrifice of the self for the state is the common thread that binds them. For Elizabeth I, it meant remaining the Virgin Queen, wedded only to her kingdom. For Elizabeth II, it meant a lifetime of neutral service, suppressing her own opinions to serve as a constitutional anchor. The regalia they wore, the orb, the sceptre, and the crown, were not mere jewellery, but symbols of a burden that few could carry for so long. As we conclude the comparison of these two remarkable eras, we see two golden ages that defined the centuries they occupied. Elizabeth I's reign was a period of exploration, literary genius, and the birth of a maritime power. Elizabeth II's reign was an era of technological revolution, social liberation, and the survival of tradition in a modern age. Both women were unlikely heirs who became the longest reigning queens of their times, proving that the strength of the monarchy often lies in the hands of those who prioritise duty above all else. Their legacies remain the pillars upon which the modern British state stands. Elizabeth I's decision to remain unmarried was a calculated political sacrifice that preserved her autonomy. By styling herself as the Virgin Queen, she wedded herself to the state, turning a potential weakness into a symbol of purity and strength. This choice avoided the complications of foreign influence through a royal husband, but it also meant a life of solitary responsibility. In the dimly lit corridors of Whitehall, she walked a lonely path, her identity inseparable from the throne she occupied. Her sacrifice ensured that England remained under her sole command, free from the entanglements of European dynastic marriages. In contrast, Elizabeth II's sacrifice was one of public exposure and the relentless scrutiny of the modern age. While she had the support of Prince Philip, her duty often forced her to prioritise the crown over her personal family life. From her early accession at age 25, every moment was dedicated to the service of the Commonwealth. The weight of the monarchy required a stoic mask, hiding personal grief and private joys behind a veil of royal protocol. Like her predecessor, she understood that the monarch's life is never truly their own, belonging instead to the history of the nation they lead. The coronation ceremonies of both queens serve as bookends to centuries of British history. In 1559, Elizabeth I was crowned in a world of religious upheaval, her ceremony a delicate balance of Catholic tradition and Protestant hope. In 1953, Elizabeth II's coronation was the first to be televised, a global event that signalled the dawn of a new media age. Despite the centuries between them, the ancient symbols, the St. Edward's crown, the sceptre, and the orb, remained identical. These objects acted as physical anchors, connecting two women across time through the unchanging rituals of the British monarchy. Both queens relied heavily on a small circle of trusted advisors to navigate the complexities of their reigns. Elizabeth I had Sir William Cecil and Francis Walsingham, her spymaster, who operated in the shadows to protect the realm from internal and external threats. Elizabeth II navigated the shifting political landscape with 15 different prime ministers, starting with the formidable Winston Churchill. These relationships were the backbone of their governance. While the nature of power shifted from absolute to constitutional, the need for a monarch to find counsel amidst the isolation of the throne remained a constant thread through the centuries. Stability was the greatest gift both Elizabeths gave to England. Elizabeth I inherited a country torn apart by the religious seesaw of her siblings' reigns. Her religious settlement established a middle way that allowed the nation to heal and flourish. Elizabeth II provided a different kind of stability, acting as a constant presence during the dissolution of the British Empire and the rise of the digital age. In a world of rapid and often frightening change, she was the anchor that held the national identity together. Both queens transformed periods of extreme transition into eras of enduring cultural and social legacy. The visual representation of the Queen evolved from the oil painting to the digital screen. Elizabeth I carefully controlled her image through face patterns, ensuring that every portrait portrayed her as the ageless, divinely ordained Gloriana. Elizabeth II became one of the most photographed women in history, her image appearing on stamps, currency, and television screens daily. While the medium changed, the purpose remained the same: to project an aura of timelessness and authority. Whether through the brushstrokes of a court painter or the pixels of a broadcast, the Queen's image was a vital tool in maintaining the monarchy's majesty. Security and defence were paramount challenges for both monarchs. Elizabeth I famously stood at Tilbury, a warrior queen in spirit, as the Spanish Armada threatened her shores. Her reign was defined by the defiance of a small island nation against a global superpower. Elizabeth II lived through the terrors of the Blitz and later navigated the tense decades of the Cold War and global terrorism. Though she did not lead armies into battle, her presence at commemorations and her role as head of the armed forces provided a symbol of national resilience. Both queens stood as figures of courage in times of existential threat. The concept of the Queen's peace was a fundamental tenet of both reigns. For Elizabeth I, this meant the internal suppression of rebellion and the promotion of a unified English identity. For Elizabeth II, it meant the transition from empire to a voluntary Commonwealth of nations, a feat of diplomacy that maintained British influence through soft power. Both women were experts at the long game of politics, knowing when to yield and when to stand firm. Their ability to adapt the monarchy to the needs of the time ensured its survival, making them the two most successful rulers in the history of the British Isles. As their long reigns drew to a close, the question of succession loomed large. Elizabeth I, having no heirs of her body, famously recognised James VI of Scotland as her successor, uniting the crowns of England and Scotland. Elizabeth II's passing marked the end of a 70-year era, with the crown passing seamlessly to her son, Charles III. These moments of transition are the ultimate test of a monarchy's strength. Both queens managed these handovers with a focus on continuity and the preservation of the institution, ensuring that even as the individual passed away, the office of the sovereign remained unbroken. Ultimately, the two Elizabethan eras represent the peak of British global influence. Elizabeth I's golden age saw the birth of the British naval empire and the heights of the English Renaissance. Elizabeth II's second Elizabethan age saw the UK reinvent itself as a cultural powerhouse and a key player in the modern international order. Though separated by 400 years, the two queens share a legacy of duty, endurance, and transformation. They are the two pillars of the British state, their names forever synonymous with eras of great progress, national pride, and the enduring power of the female monarch. As Elizabeth I's reign neared its end in 1603, the atmosphere in the royal court was thick with anxiety. For decades, the Virgin Queen had refused to name a successor, leaving the future of the nation in a state of suspended animation. The transition to James VI of Scotland marked the end of the Tudor line, a moment of profound uncertainty that reshaped the British Isles. This shift was more than just a change in personnel, it was the closing of a mythic chapter. The shadows of the Tudor court lengthened as the crown moved to a new dynasty, leaving a legacy of strength. Fast forward 4 centuries, and the transition following the death of Elizabeth II followed a vastly different protocol, yet carried a similar weight of historical gravity. The accession of King Charles III was a global event, broadcasted in high definition to billions, contrasting sharply with the whispered secrets of the 17th century court, where Elizabeth I's death was a moment of dynastic collapse. Elizabeth II's passing was a masterclass in institutional continuity. Both events, however, reminded the world that while monarchs are mortal, the office of the crown is designed to be eternal and unchanging, bridging the gap between centuries. The symbolism of the two queens defined their respective ages. Elizabeth I was often depicted as the Gloriana, her image meticulously controlled through portraits filled with allegorical symbols like pearls for purity and eyes for her omniscience. Elizabeth II's image was similarly iconic, but evolved through the lens of mass media, appearing on stamps, banknotes, and television screens. Both women understood that their image was their greatest weapon and their heaviest burden. They were not merely rulers, they were living brands, symbols of national unity that transcended the messy realities of daily politics and governance across 400 years. Westminster Abbey stands as the silent witness to both coronations. In 1559, Elizabeth I processed through a London still recovering from religious upheaval, her coronation a statement of Protestant defiance. In 1953, Elizabeth II's coronation was the first to be televised, a moment that brought the ancient mystery of the monarchy into the living rooms of the common people. Despite the centuries between them, the rituals remained remarkably consistent. The anointing with holy oil, the swearing of the oath, and the heavy weight of St. Edward's crown. These ceremonies anchored the British state to its deep medieval roots and continuity. For both queens, the crown was an entity separate from their own personhood. Elizabeth I famously spoke of having the body of a weak and feeble woman, but the heart and stomach of a king. She suppressed her personal desires for the sake of the realm. Elizabeth II echoed this dedication, famously pledging her entire life, whether it be long or short, to the service of the Commonwealth. This self-sacrifice is the common thread that binds the two Elizabeths. They both lived within the gilded cage of duty, their personal identities submerged beneath the immense expectations of the British throne. The governance of the two eras reveals the changing nature of power. Elizabeth I ruled with a privy council of trusted advisors like William Cecil, managing a growing intelligence network to protect her life and the state. Her power was personal and often absolute. Elizabeth II, as a constitutional monarch, worked with 15 different prime ministers, providing a unique continuity of wisdom to the government. Though her power was symbolic, her weekly audiences remained a pillar of the state. Both queens sat at the centre of a complex web of information, influence, and historical responsibility that defined the British state. The psychological toll of the throne is a hidden history. Elizabeth I faced constant threats of assassination, rebellion, and the isolation of being a single woman in a male-dominated world. She often retreated into a protective shell of pageantry. Elizabeth II faced the relentless scrutiny of the paparazzi and the erosion of the royal family's privacy in the digital age. Both queens mastered the royal mask, a calm, inscrutable public face that hid their private sorrows and the immense pressure of representing a nation. Their endurance was not just political, but emotional, a feat of incredible mental fortitude and sacrifice. Expansion and globalization defined both reigns. Elizabeth I's explorers, like Drake and Raleigh, laid the groundwork for a maritime empire that would eventually span the globe. It was an era of discovery and often brutal conquest. Elizabeth II's reign oversaw the transformation of that empire into a voluntary commonwealth of 56 independent nations. She travelled more than any other monarch in history, acting as a global diplomat and a symbol of reconciliation. While the methods changed from wooden ships to jet engines, the goal remained the same: maintaining Britain's place at the centre of the world stage and historical legacy. The final chapters for both queens were marked by national mourning on an unprecedented scale. Elizabeth I's funeral in 1603 saw thousands lining the streets of London, mourning the end of an era of stability. Elizabeth II's funeral in 2022 was a masterclass in state ceremony, watched by millions worldwide, marking the end of the longest reign in British history. In both cases, the funeral was not just a farewell to a woman, but a ritual of national identity. The silence that fell over the country in those moments spoke volumes about the deep connection between the monarch and her people. As we look back on these two extraordinary women, the parallels are striking. Both Elizabeths ascended the throne at times of transition and left behind a legacy that redefined their nation. They provided a sense of permanence in a world of constant change. Elizabeth I's golden age and Elizabeth II's second Elizabethan age will forever be linked as the bookends of Britain's most influential centuries. Their names are etched into the stone of history, serving as a reminder that the strength of the monarchy lies not in its power to command, but in its ability to endure, adapt, and inspire. The crown itself serves as a silent witness to the passage of centuries. For Elizabeth I, the imperial state crown was a symbol of divine right, a heavy burden worn to unify a fractured nation. For Elizabeth II, it was a symbol of service, a weight she bore with grace for 7 decades. These jewels, sparkling amidst the velvet and gold, bridge the gap between two distant worlds. They remind us that while the individual wears the crown itself belongs to the office, a timeless emblem of authority that transcends the mortal lives of those who hold it. This continuity of regalia is the heartbeat of the British monarchy. Consider the transformation of the capital they both called home. In the 16th century, London was a sprawling, timber-framed city of narrow alleys and the constant smell of the Thames. Elizabeth I would have looked out from the tower at a city defined by wood and stone. Elizabeth II saw the same river, but framed by glass, steel, and the soaring heights of modern engineering. Despite the architectural evolution, the heartbeat of the city remained consistent. Both queens oversaw periods where London was the epicenter of global trade, culture, and political discourse, shaping the very soul of the British identity and its enduring place in the world. Elizabeth I's decision to remain unmarried was perhaps her greatest political maneuver. By styling herself as the Virgin Queen, she became the mother of her people, wedded to the state itself. This sacrifice of personal intimacy for the sake of national stability defined her reign. She navigated a world dominated by men, using her status as a single woman to play rival powers against one another. Her strength was her independence, a fierce and lonely path that ensured England would never be subservient to a foreign king. It was a masterclass in branding and strategic isolation, crafting a legendary image that would endure for centuries. In contrast, Elizabeth II's life was defined by the stability of her long marriage to Prince Philip. Yet her sacrifice was no less significant. She spent 70 years sublimating her private self to the requirements of the crown. Every public appearance, every carefully chosen word was a testament to her commitment to duty over personal desire. She lived in a fishbowl of media scrutiny, maintaining a stoic neutrality that allowed her to serve as a unifying figurehead for diverse populations across the globe. Her life was an exercise in restraint, a lifelong commitment to the promise she made as a young princess to serve her people faithfully. The scope of their influence reached far beyond the shores of their island nation. Elizabeth I looked toward the horizon, encouraging explorers like Drake and Raleigh to claim new lands and open trade routes, planting the seeds of an empire. Elizabeth II navigated the sunset of that same empire, gracefully managing the transition from colonial rule to a voluntary Commonwealth of independent nations. While one queen saw the dawn of Britain's global expansion, the other ensured its legacy survived through cooperation and mutual respect. Both were architects of Britain's place on the world stage, guiding the nation through vastly different and challenging geopolitical realities. Art and image making played a crucial role in how both queens were perceived. Elizabeth I carefully controlled her portraits, using symbols like the ermine and the rainbow to convey her wisdom and purity. These paintings were tools of statecraft, designed to inspire awe and loyalty. Centuries later, Elizabeth II embraced the power of the camera and television to bring the monarchy into the living rooms of her subjects. From her televised coronation to her annual broadcasts, she understood that being seen was essential to being believed. Both women were masters of their public image, using the technology of their time to maintain the royal and historic mystique. Behind the public pageantry lay a private world of faith and reflection. For both Elizabeths, the role of Supreme Governor of the Church of England was not merely a title, but a guiding principle. In the quiet of their chapels, away from the eyes of history, they sought the strength to carry out their duties. This spiritual foundation provided a moral compass during times of crisis and war. Their shared faith connected them across the centuries, offering a sense of continuity that grounded their reigns in tradition and service. It was this inner conviction that fueled their outward resilience through decades of unprecedented global and national challenge. Ultimately, their journeys lead to the same sacred ground. In Westminster Abbey, the history of the British monarchy is literally etched into the cold stone floor. Elizabeth I rests in a grand tomb alongside her half-sister Mary, a final testament to the Tudor dynasty's complex legacy. Nearby, the world mourned as Elizabeth II was laid to rest, joining her ancestors in the continuity of the royal line. These stone monuments are more than just resting places. They are symbols of the enduring nature of the crown. Even in death, these two queens remain central figures in the national narrative, their stories forever intertwined in the heart of the Abbey. As the torch passes to a new generation, the impact of these two icons remains unmistakable. They redefined what it meant to be a female sovereign in a world often resistant to change. They proved that a queen could be both a symbol of tradition and a driver of modernization. The lessons of their reigns, resilience, adaptability, and an unwavering commitment to duty, continue to shape the future of the monarchy. The bridge they built between the 16th and 21st centuries stands firm, a foundation upon which the next chapters of British history will be written. Their combined legacy remains the gold standard of royal leadership. Two eras, two queens, one name that has come to represent the very best of British character. Elizabeth I and Elizabeth II were separated by nearly 400 years, yet they were united by a shared destiny. They guided their people through storms and celebrations, remaining the one constant in an ever-shifting world. As we close this chapter of history, we recognise that their stories are not just about the past, but about the enduring power of service. The Elizabethan ages may have ended, but the spirit of these two remarkable women will continue to inspire generations to come. Theirs is a legacy of eternal light and duty.